In the heart of ancient Ireland, where the rolling green of the hills kissed the low-hanging clouds, and the air itself seemed to carry whispers from realms unseen, there existed a world both fragile and eternal. The land was veiled in mist, and that mist was more than weather. It was a living breath, a veil between what eyes could see and what the soul could sense. Beneath its silver folds, mortals lived and fought, but so too did gods wander, their presence felt in sudden storms, in crows circling above battlefields, in the shiver that danced down the spine when night deepened and silence grew too still. This was an Ireland not yet fractured by time, where destiny was a force woven through every life, and where the thin line between desire and destruction was walked with trembling steps. Among the sagas sung by bards, there rose a single figure who shone with the fire of both youth and fate. His name was Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster, a warrior whose strength defied his years, whose passion carried the ferocity of an untamed flame. He was not born to fade gently into the quiet of life. His story was shaped by prophecy and blood, by the hands of gods who saw in him both a weapon and a warning. His battles would echo across generations, his choices sealing him in the tapestry of legend. Yet even in the heat of war, even amidst swords clashing and shields splintering, his story was not only one of violence, it was also one of longing, of the heart's perilous pull, and of the irresistible gravity of a goddess who knew both the sweetness of love and the cruelty of fate. For in those same fields where Cuchulainn's name grew in renown, another presence stirred, ancient and eternal. She was the Morrigan, goddess of war, of sovereignty, of passion that burned as fiercely as it destroyed. She was the crow upon the branch, watching his kings fell and lovers wept. She was the mist curling around the warrior's shoulders, a touch both protective and suffocating. Her beauty was not of mortal kind. It carried the sharpness of blades, the shadow of storms, the thrill of surrender to something greater than oneself. In her sensuality and death intertwined, for to desire her was to stand at the edge of life itself. She was the inevitability of war-given flesh, the hunger of the earth for blood, the whispered promise that even in ruin there could be ecstasy.
The bards who spoke of her told stories, not with reverence alone, but with unease. For the Morrigan was not to be bound, not to be claimed by mortal hands, or even the wills of other gods. She was desire incarnate, but she was also the cry of the raven that marks the fall of heroes. When she turned her gaze upon Cuchulainn, Ireland itself seemed to hold its breath, as though the mist thickened to listen, as though the rivers slowed their songs to hear. What would happen when passion and pride collided, when a mortal flame, fierce and reckless, met the goddess who embodied the storm? In their meeting was written not just the tale of love and rejection, but of fate itself, a dance where every step was edged with inevitability. The land of Ireland was no silent witness. Its very soil was steeped in omens. On mornings before battle, the sun would rise blood red, casting the fields in the hue of things yet to come. Flocks of crows gathered in dark skies, their calls more like laughter than cries. Prophecies hung in the air, spoken by druids who glimpsed fragments of futures too heavy for human hearts. Cuchulain's destiny had been marked long before his name echoed on lips. Glory and ruin bound as one, the sweetness of victory shadowed by the certainty of tragedy. Yet what prophecy cannot capture is the heartbeat, the pull of one soul toward another, even when that pull leads to the edge of oblivion. In these stories, gods did not merely watch from afar. They walked among mortals, touched them, tempted them, tested them. The Morrigan's presence was never distant. She was felt in the way the air grew thick when she drew near, in the way men and women alike felt both longing and fear at her passing. She embodied a truth both intoxicating and terrible, that love is never separate from death, that passion is always tinged with peril. When she turned her eyes toward Cuchulain, it was not simply a goddess watching a warrior. It was desire reaching toward defiance, eternity longing for the fleeting brilliance of mortal fire.
And so the tale begins, not with swords clashing or blood spilled, but with silence, with a moment where time itself seemed to lean closer, watching. The Morrigan, dark-haired and radiant with the shimmer of night's mysteries, set her gaze upon the young hero who stood taller than men twice his years, whose eyes held both boyish ardor and the shadow of doom. She saw not just a warrior, but a flame that could ignite the fabric of destiny itself. She desired him, not only with the hunger of the flesh, but with the hunger of fate. To claim him was to entwine her essence with the story of Ireland itself. To be denied by him was to unleash storms that would ripple through ages. Yet Cuchulain, for all his might, was still a man of flesh, blood, and stubborn pride. He was not blind to her allure. He felt the pull of her nearness like a tide, like the sudden rush of wind that makes the heart race. But he was also bound to his path, to honor, to the mortal resistance that makes a hero's story both beautiful and doomed. In rejecting her, he was not only turning away from a goddess, he was turning away from the embrace of inevitability itself. And in that choice was born the seed of both passion and tragedy, of an encounter that would linger in the mist and in the marrow of Ireland's legends forever. As the mists curl tighter, as the sound of distant battles rumble through the land, we are drawn into this story, not as observers, but as participants. The Morrigan and Cuchulain are not relics of a forgotten age. They are mirrors of our own longings, our own refusals, our own dances with desire that lead us to both ecstasy and ruin. Their tale begins, as all great myths do, with an atmosphere heavy with promise and dread, with the stirring of forces larger than life, and with a single glance that binds a goddess of war to a mortal flame. What follows will not be gentle. It will not be safe, but it will be unforgettable. For in this meeting of divinity and humanity, Ireland itself seemed to ache, as though the land, the sky, and the gods themselves knew they were about to witness a love story written in both fire and blood.
Cuchulainn was no ordinary youth. Though scarcely past the tender bloom of boyhood, his name already echoed across the valleys and forests of Ulster like the distant roar of thunder. He carried himself with a fierce radiance that both unsettled and inspired those around him. His body was lithe but carved by discipline, each movement charged with the restless energy of a storm that refuses to sleep. In his eyes burned a light that seemed too great for one so young, a mingling of hunger, defiance, and a touch of sorrow, as though even in laughter he could not escape the shadows of destiny whispered around him since birth. He was a hero in the making, but also a boy standing at the precipice of manhood, his passions raw, his desires untempered, his spirit yearning not only for glory, but for connection, for intimacy, for the tenderness that even the fiercest warrior secretly craves. His heart was restless. Glory drew him, the clash of arms, the songs sung of his victories, the way the people looked at him with both awe and fear. Yet beneath the armor of pride, beneath the fire of his battle rage, there lay the vulnerable truth of a mortal soul, one that longed for love, that feared abandonment, and that could be swayed by beauty as easily as by honor. To the world, he was the Hound of Ulster, protector of the land, unyielding and unbreakable. But within, he was still flesh, still vulnerable to temptation, still prone to longing glances and the ache of loneliness that not even victory could soothe. It was this duality that made him irresistible, not just a warrior, but a man whose heart beat wildly, who could be pierced not only by spears, but by the sharp sweetness of desire. And then there was the Morrigan. She was not of the mortal coil, not bound by the fragility of time. She was eternal, as much a force as a being. Yet she walked among men in forms that dazzled and disarmed. To gaze upon her was to feel one's own breath catch in the throat, to sense beauty so intoxicating it unsettled the soul. Her hair, dark as a raven's wing, shimmered like the midnight sky, and her eyes burned with secrets older than any kingdom. Her lips curved with both promise and threat, a smile that could soothe or devour, depending on the turn of her will. She was not the soft beauty of mortal maidens, but something sharper, elemental, dangerous, like fire reflected on steel, like the scent of roses masking the iron tang of blood. She was the goddess of war, yes, but she was also the goddess of passion, and in her presence these two were inseparable. To love her was to invite ruin, yet to resist her was to awaken her wrath. The Morrigan embodied contradictions. She was a lover and a destroyer, a vision of seduction and the shadow of death itself. Her sensuality was not only of the flesh, but of the spirit, the kind that stirred longing so deep it reached into one's marrow. Yet behind the allure was power beyond comprehension, the authority of the land, the sovereignty of Ireland herself, a reminder that even kings bowed before her. She could appear as a radiant woman whose beauty could still a battlefield, or as a crow circling above, shrieking with the laughter of death. In her, desire and terror were one, and mortals were left trembling between the urge to worship her and the instinct to flee. This was her gift, her curse, her nature. To enchant, to ensnare, to remind all who beheld her that passion was inseparable from peril. It was inevitable that their paths would cross, for what greater contrast could the world bear than the brilliance of youth and the eternity of divinity? Cuchulainn, the mortal flame that burned too brightly to last, and the Morrigan, the endless night who longed to taste the fire of mortality. Between them lay a tension as old as the world itself, the pull of the divine toward the fleeting sweetness of human life, and the yearning of mortals to touch something eternal, even at the cost of destruction. He was flesh, warm and impulsive, with a heart that beat too fast. She was spirit, cold and boundless, yet aching to be warmed by the touch of what she could never truly possess. Their story was not merely a meeting of two figures. It was the clash of love and doom, of desire that burned even as it consumed. For Cuchulainn, the Morrigan was temptation beyond measure. To accept her would be to secure power, to bind himself to the goddess who could tilt battles in his favor, who could whisper victories into being. Yet to yield would also be to lose himself, to become a pawn in her eternal designs. Pride stiffened his resolve, honor urged him to resist, yet the part of him that was still young, still yearning, could not help but tremble before her beauty. He was torn between glory and surrender, between the safety of defiance and the ecstasy of ruin. His strength lay in his ability to fight armies, yet his weakness lay in his inability to shield his heart from longing.
For the Morrigan, Cuchulainn was unlike any mortal she had known. Many warriors worshipped her, many fell trembling at her feet, yet few dared defy her. Few carried within them the audacity to meet her gaze as though they were equals. His refusal of her was not merely rejection, it was defiance, and that defiance stirred in her something deeper than wrath. It awakened desire, obsession, the hunger to claim what resisted her, to bend the unyielding to her will. She did not simply want his body, though that too she desired. She wanted his spirit, his defiance, his flame. She wanted to press him to the breaking point, to taste his resistance until it crumbled into surrender. And in this hunger, she revealed her own vulnerability. For in desiring him, she risked being denied, risked feeling the sting of a mortal's pride against the endless longing of a goddess. The contrast between them was not merely of form, but of essence. He was the blaze of a torch that lights the night but soon burns out. She was the endless sky, vast and eternal, watching countless fires rise and fade. Yet when they drew near, time itself seemed to falter. The torch longed to burn brighter, to defy its brevity, and the sky longed to be warmed, to be touched by fire, if only for a moment. Their attraction was inevitable, their collision unstoppable. In their dance, Ireland itself seemed to tremble, for their union or their conflict would shape not only their lives, but the fate of kingdoms, the songs of bards, the whispering of the wind across the hills. And so the stage was set, not with armies clashing, but with glances exchanged, with silences heavy with promise, with a goddess who embodied death and desire, gazing upon a warrior whose flame was too bright to be ignored. Theirs was not the meeting of equals, yet neither was it the submission of one to the other. It was a tension that could only unravel in extremes, love or destruction, ecstasy or ruin. And in that tension lay the addictive pull of their tale, the promise that what would unfold was not a mere story, but an unraveling of destiny itself, spun of threads as fragile as breath and as unbreakable as prophecy.
It was on a morning heavy with mist that the Morrigan first came to him, not as a crow circling above the battlefield, but as a woman walking through the folds of twilight, as if the earth itself yielded to her presence. The air stilled at her arrival, the cries of birds silenced, even the grass seemed to bend beneath her feet, as though it knew who tread upon it. She did not announce herself with thunder or fire, for she needed none. Her beauty carried its own power, a beauty sharpened by danger, softened by promise. Cuchulainn, sharpening his spear in preparation for battle, felt her before he saw her, as though some current ran through the marrow of his bones and whispered that something greater than himself had drawn near. When he lifted his gaze, she was there, dark hair tumbling like a river of midnight, eyes gleaming with secrets that promised both tenderness and ruin. Her voice, when it came, was low and melodious, like the hum of the earth before a storm. Cuchulainn, she said, not as a greeting, but as a claim, as though she had spoken his name countless times before, as though it had always belonged on her lips. She offered him more than words. She offered herself, her protection, her power, her favor in battle. She promised him victories beyond imagining, the immortality of his name, the certainty that no enemy could strike him down while she walked at his side. Her words were velvet and steel, each syllable caressing his pride, each promise pressing upon his desire. To be chosen by the Morrigan was no small thing. Kings had begged for her blessing, warriors had fallen to their knees for the mere chance of her gaze. And here she stood, offering not just her gaze, but her love, her body, her divine allegiance. For a moment, Cuchulainn wavered. He felt it, the pull of her nearness, the intoxication of her beauty. The scent of her hair seemed to mingle with the damp mist, sharp and sweet, like rain upon iron. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the undeniable awareness of her, her lips curved in a half-smile, her eyes that burned not like fire, but like the deep glow of embers waiting to consume. To take her hand would mean safety, would mean desire fulfilled, would mean surrender to the warmth of something he both craved and feared.
Yet pride rose in him like a shield. He was Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster, bound to his people, to his code, to his own fierce independence. To yield to her was to admit need, to confess vulnerability. Worse still, he feared her. Not fear in the sense of cowardice, but the deeper fear of being swallowed whole, of losing himself in the endless night that she embodied. He had heard tales of her, the goddess who delighted in blood, who tangled love with ruin, who left those who yielded to her trembling between ecstasy and despair. To step into her arms might mean never stepping out again. And so he refused her. His words, though steady, carried the weight of both desire and denial. Great goddess, your beauty is beyond words, and your power shines brighter than any star. Yet I am not yours to claim. My path is my own, and I will not stray from it, not for glory, not for love, not even for you. Silence fell between them, but it was not empty silence. It was the silence of a bowstring pulled taut, of the air just before lightning strikes. The Morrigan's smile faded, replaced by something sharper, colder. Her eyes narrowed, and in them flickered both wounded pride and dangerous hunger. Few had denied her before. Few had dared to reject what she offered. For a moment, her beauty seemed to shift, shadows sliding across her face, a crow's harsh cry echoing faintly in the mist, though no bird could be seen. "You would refuse me?" she asked, her voice now edged like a blade hidden in silk. "You would cast aside the favor of the goddess who could crown your victories, who could shelter your name from ruin?" Cuchulainn's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed at him to bow, to yield, to take what was offered and be safe. But pride stiffened his spine, and the fire of youth burned too fiercely to bend. "I fight by my own hand. My victories will be mine alone. I will not sell myself, not even to you." Her laughter, when it came, was low and haunting, the sound of crows scattering from treetops at dusk. It was not the laughter of joy, but something darker. The laughter of a predator amused by prey that dares to bare its teeth. "So proud, so young," she whispered, stepping closer, her presence suffocating and intoxicating all at once. "You think yourself beyond my touch? You think you can deny desire as if it were so easily dismissed? You will learn, Cuchulainn. Desire denied becomes wrath. Love rejected becomes vengeance."
For in her heart a transformation had begun. What she had offered in tenderness now twisted into obsession. Rejection was not something the Morrigans suffered lightly. To deny her was to wound her pride, to spark the darker fires of her nature. and yet beneath her anger still flickered desire. She wanted him all the more for his resistance, for the arrogance that dared to place human will against divine passion. He had become not merely a man she longed to touch, but a challenge she longed to break. Cuchulainn felt the weight of her gaze as though it pressed upon his very skin. His body betrayed him, shivering not with cold but with the electric thrill of her nearness. Part of him ached to reach for her, to taste the lips that now curved with disdain, to surrender to the inevitability of her embrace, yet he held himself back, clinging to the fragile barrier of his pride, even as he knew it was a barrier destined to shatter. His rejection was not clean, not absolute. It was laced with desire, and she could sense it. She could feel it in the tremor of his voice, in the quickening of his pulse. His words denied her, but his body whispered otherwise. And the Morrigan was a goddess who listened not only to words, but to the unspoken truths beneath them. The tension between them became unbearable, like two storms colliding, neither yielding, neither retreating. He stood firm, his youth blazing, his pride unbroken. She stood before him, eternal and unyielding, her beauty now veined with menace, her passion sharpened into wrath. Between them hung the intoxicating scent of attraction, mingled with the acrid taste of doom. What began as an offering of love had turned into the birth of obsession. What began as a chance for union now pulsed with the inevitability of conflict. The Morrigan would not forget his refusal, nor would she forgive it. And Cuchulainn, though he walked away from her that day, would carry the weight of her eyes upon him, would feel the echo of her voice in his blood, would know that he had not escaped her, only delayed what fate had already set in motion. Desire had clashed with pride, love with duty, passion with defiance, and in the collision, doom was born, not sudden, not immediate, but certain, as inevitable as the crow's cry over a battlefield.
Night descended over the plains of Ulster with the slow sweep of shadows, and the air grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and burning wood. Cuchulainn, weary from battle, yet restless in spirit, wandered beyond the campfires, seeking the silence that eluded him. His body carried the ache of wounds, but his heart bore a weight far more dangerous, the memory of the Morrigan's voice, her gaze that pierced deeper than any blade, the lingering echo of her promises and threats. He told himself he had rejected her, that he had chosen honor over temptation. Yet denial did not erase her presence, it only sharpened it, turning her absence into a haunting. It was then, in the deep of night, that she came again, not with the wrath of storm, but with the stillness of a dream. He felt her before he saw her, the way one feels the pull of the tide before the waves crash upon the shore. She appeared to him not as crow or phantom, but as woman, radiant and terrible, her beauty cloaked in the silver glow of moonlight. Her steps were soundless upon the grass, yet each one seemed to drum against his chest until he turned, and there she was, closer than he had imagined, more intoxicating than memory could contain. Her eyes held him fast, pools of darkness threaded with fire. She did not speak at once. Instead, she let silence coil around them, thick and unbreakable, until the beat of his heart felt loud enough to betray him. Then, with a voice soft enough to feel like touch, she whispered,
You resist me, yet you cannot escape me." Cuchulainn stiffened, though his body betrayed him with its trembling. "I walk my own path," he answered, though the words lacked the certainty they once carried. Her lips curved in a smile, not mocking, but intimate, as though she tasted the lie in his defiance. She stepped closer, so close he could feel the warmth of her breath against his cheek, could smell the faint sweetness of heather clinging to her skin. "You burn too brightly to walk alone. Your fire will consume you unless I temper it. Let me bear it with you, Cuchulainn. Let me wrap you in my power, in my love, in my night."
Her hand rose, and before he could stop her, her fingers traced the line of his jaw. The touch was feather light, yet it sent fire coursing through him, a heat that no armor could contain. He closed his eyes against it, against the way his body betrayed him, the way longing surged despite every vow he had made. Her touch was not merely physical. It seeped into his spirit, unraveling the careful walls he had built around himself. "Why do you resist what you desire?" she asked, her lips brushing so near his ear that the words seemed to slip beneath his skin. "You crave me as I crave you. In war, you are unyielding, but here..." Her fingers trailed down to his chest, resting above his racing heart. "Here, you are mine already." Cuchulainn shuddered, torn between surrender and defiance. He opened his eyes and met hers, and in that gaze he saw everything he feared: the sweetness of love, the intoxication of surrender, and the certainty of ruin. Her beauty was unbearable, not because it was flawed, but because it was perfect in its danger, like the gleam of a blade kissed by sunlight. "I will not be yours," he forced out, though his voice was husky, frayed with the weight of longing. Her smile deepened, and with it came a darkness. "You speak as though choice belongs to you." She leaned closer, her lips brushing against his, not yet a kiss, but the promise of one, so sharp with anticipation that it left him dizzy. Desire does not ask permission. Fate does not bow to pride. You are bound to me, Cuchulainn, whether in love or in war or in death. You are mine. The words struck him harder than any spear. He wanted to deny them, to wrench himself free of her hold, but the truth was undeniable. Part of him already belonged to her. He could feel it in the way his body leaned toward hers, in the way his breath matched her rhythm, and in the way every thread of his being yearned to surrender, if only for a moment, if only for relief from the fire she had stoked within him. Her lips finally touched his, not with gentleness, but with the force of inevitability. It was a kiss that tasted of iron and honey, of blood and nectar, of love braided with violence. It left him gasping, trembling, torn between passion and terror. He kissed her back, if only for a heartbeat, his hands clutching her shoulders as though drowning and reaching for air. But even as he surrendered, he resisted, pulling back with a cry, half born of desire, half of fear. "No," he gasped, tearing himself away, his chest heaving. "You would devour me, Morrigan. You would strip me of myself. I will not yield.
Her eyes darkened, not with sorrow, but with something fiercer, a hunger sharpened into wrath. Yet even as anger flickered, desire burned brighter still. She stepped toward him again, and this time her presence was no longer merely seductive. It was suffocating, overwhelming, as though the night itself pressed upon him, as though love and war had fused into one unstoppable force. "You are already yielding," she whispered, her voice a mixture of promise and curse. "Every refusal is a confession. Every denial is desire unspoken. You cannot fight me, Cuchulainn. You cannot fight what you are to me, what I am to you." He raised his spear, not to strike, but to place the shaft between them, a fragile barrier of wood against divinity. His hand trembled. The spear was steady in battle, but now it quivered, betraying the war within him. She laid her fingers upon it, and the wood seemed to hum beneath her touch, as though even the weapon longed to yield. In that moment, Cuchulainn understood the depth of his torment. He did not only fight armies, he fought himself. He fought the longing that threatened to consume him, the pride that refused to surrender, the fate that bound him to this bodice whose love was indistinguishable from ruin. The night around them thickened, the stars above dimming, as if unwilling to witness what transpired. And there, beneath the gaze of eternity, mortal and goddess stood entwined, not in union, not in separation, but in a liminal space where passion was war and war was passion. Every breath, every glance, every trembling touch blurred the lines until Cuchulainn no longer knew if he resisted her or yearned for her, if he fought against destruction or surrendered to it. It was a climax, not of fulfillment, but of collision, a moment so charged, so intoxicating that the world itself seemed to hold its breath. And in that breathless pause, their fates became irrevocably bound.
The morning that followed their night of collision was gray, the sky low and restless, clouds swollen with the promise of rain. Cuchulainn awoke not to peace, but to the gnawing memory of what had transpired beneath the moonlight. Her lips still burned upon his own, though he had torn himself from her. Her voice still coiled around his heart, though he had sworn to resist it. He felt her everywhere, in the tremor of his hands as he bound his armor, in the ache of his chest where her fingers had rested, in the fevered edge of his dreams that had been filled with shadows of wings and the intoxicating scent of her hair. He had not yielded to her fully, but neither had he escaped. And in his refusal, something greater than desire had been unleashed. When next the Morrigan came to him, she was no longer the lover cloaked in moonlight. She appeared on the battlefield, cloaked in crow's feathers, her beauty veiled by the sharpness of fury. She no longer spoke with the softness of seduction. Her voice cracked like thunder across the plains. The eyes that once smoldered with promise now glowed with vengeance, the kind of fire that does not warm but sears. "You refused me," she said,
her words cutting through the clash of swords, through the cries of the dying. You turned away what was offered freely, and so you shall have nothing freely given. Where I would have shielded you, I will now strike. Where I would have crowned you in love, I will mark you in ruin. Cuchulainn stood tall, his spear raised, though in his chest his heart twisted with something far more complicated than fear. To face her as an enemy was to feel the wound of what might have been. He looked upon her and saw not only the goddess of war who threatened him, but also the woman who had pressed her lips to his, who had whispered of desire, who had offered him the sweetness of surrender. His rejection had turned that sweetness into venom, but still the taste lingered. "I do not fear you," he said, his voice steady, though beneath it trembled the ache of longing. "I will fight as I must, whether God or man stands against me." She laughed then, but it was not the laughter of a lover. It was the harsh caw of a raven, the sound of inevitability unfurling. With a wave of her hand, the sky darkened, and from the mist she took forms to torment him. She became a heifer, charging at him with the force of untamed strength. She became an eel, twisting to trip him, to pull him down into the mud. She became a wolf, teeth bared, eyes gleaming with hunger. Each time Cuchulainn fought back, wounding her in each form, driving her off with his unyielding will. Yet with every blow his heart grew heavier, for he knew what it meant. He was striking not only at his enemy, but at the goddess who had once desired him. He was fighting against the very passion that had nearly undone him. Wounded but unbroken, the Morrigan returned to him, not as beast, but as woman, her beauty now sharpened by rage. Blood streaked her lips, her eyes burned with fury, but still she stood radiant, terrible, irresistible. She gazed at him, and for a heartbeat the battlefield around them seemed to fall silent, as though the earth itself paused to witness what passed between them. "You could have been mine," she whispered, her voice raw with anger and longing alike. "Together we could have ruled passion and war, fire and night. But you chose pride, you chose loneliness, and so you shall walk your path to glory, but every step will lead you closer to death. I will see you undone, Cuchulainn. I will mark your doom with my own hand." Her words were not a threat. They were a curse, a binding of fate. The air itself seemed to tremble as her vow settled into the fabric of the world, sealing his destiny. Cuchulainn, though unbowed, felt the weight of it press upon him. He knew in that moment that he could not escape her. No matter how many victories he claimed, no matter how many foes he struck down, her shadow would follow him, her presence would linger, her curse would whisper at the edges of his glory. She would not kill him outright, for that would be too merciful. Instead, she would entwine his triumphs with tragedy, his fame with sorrow,
his very name with doom. And yet, even as her wrath blazed, there remained in her eyes a glimmer of the passion she had once offered him. For curses, too, are born of love denied. Her fury was rooted in desire unfulfilled, in the wound of rejection, in the bitter ache of a goddess who had reached for intimacy and been cast aside. She hated him, and she desired him still, and in that tangled knot of feeling lay the essence of their bond. It was not fulfilled in love, not sealed in union, but etched in the darker ink of tragedy.
From that day forward, Cuchulainn fought with her shadow upon him. Each victory rang hollow, for he felt the echo of her curse in every cry of triumph. Each wound he sustained burned with the memory of her touch, the phantom of her lips, the sound of her laughter turned cruel. His fate was no longer his alone. It was bound to hers, written in the balance between defiance and desire, pride and surrender. He became a hero of unmatched renown, yet beneath the songs sung in his honor, there always lay the silence of inevitability, the knowledge that his end would not come by chance, but by the will of the goddess he had denied. The Morrigan, too, carried the weight of what had passed. Though she cursed him, though she swore his ruin, she remained tethered to him in ways she could not sever. She haunted him not only as enemy, but as lover scorned. Her wrath was a mask for longing, her curses veils for the ache of a passion unconsummated. She had become his adversary, but the bond between them was deeper than any victory or defeat. It was the bond of what could have been, the haunting echo of desire turned to ash. And so their story settled into the marrow of myth, not as a tale of love fulfilled, but as one of love denied, of passion twisted into doom. Theirs was not a union of tenderness, but of tragedy, not a flame that warmed, but one that burned too brightly, consuming itself in the darkness. It was this inevitability, this intertwining of glory and ruin, that ensured their names would never be forgotten. For myths are not born of happy endings. They are born of the haunting beauty of what cannot be, of the sweetness of desire sharpened into loss, of the cruel perfection of destiny fulfilled.
There are some stories that do not resolve into harmony, that do not grant the sweetness of fulfillment. Instead, they linger like the echo of a song cut short, beautiful because of its incompleteness, unforgettable because of its wound. The tale of Cuchulainn and the Morrigan is one such story, a union never realized, a passion both intoxicating and fatal, a dance between mortal flame and divine shadow that could only ever end in tragedy. Desire, in its purest form, is neither blessing nor curse. It is both. It is the spark that draws two beings together, that ignites the heart, that promises joy and belonging,
But desire is also a hunger that cannot be sated, a fire that consumes even as it warms. For Cuchulainn, desire came clothed in the form of a goddess whose beauty was inseparable from destruction. For the Morrigan, desire was sharpened by pride, by the longing not only to love, but to possess. Between them, passion became indistinguishable from peril. Theirs was never the tender love of quiet unions, nor the steady flame of lasting devotion. It was lightning in the heart of a storm, brilliant and brief, dangerous in its very intensity. It was the meeting of two forces too great to coexist, one mortal, burning with the fierce pride of youth and glory, the other divine, eternal, embodying the inevitability of war and death. Each desired the other, yet each was bound by nature to oppose. And so their story unfolded not as a consummation, but as a collision. What remains most haunting is not that Cuchulainn rejected the Morrigan, nor that she cursed him in her wrath. It is that beneath the curse, beneath the fury, lay a bond that neither could fully sever. Even as she vowed to bring about his doom, the memory of her touch remained etched upon him, as vivid as the scars of battle. Even as she circled him in crow's form, mocking and taunting, her eyes carried the memory of longing. Desire denied is not erased, it is transformed, crystallized into tragedy, sharpened into myth. And so when the poets speak of Cuchulainn, they sing not only of his victories, of the countless foes struck down by his unmatched spear. They sing too of the shadow that followed him, of the goddess who wove herself into his fate, of the curse born not of hatred alone, but of passion unfulfilled. His heroism was not merely in battle, it was in the way he bore the weight of both glory and doom. The way he walked forward knowing each triumph carried him closer to an end already foretold.
The Morrigan herself becomes more than an adversary in this telling. She is not a villain to be vanquished, nor a lover scorned and forgotten. She is the eternal embodiment of desire's dual edge, alluring and perilous, nurturing and destructive. She is the voice that whispers to every heart that yearns, reminding us that passion is never free, that intimacy always carries its price. She is the crow circling above the battlefield, reminding warriors that their glory is fleeting, that every embrace of triumph carries the kiss of death. Yet she is also the woman who reached out in longing, who offered love alongside ruin, who revealed that even goddesses are not untouched by the ache of desire. In Cuchulainn's story, we see the shape of the tragic hero, radiant in his youth, defiant in his pride, brilliant in his glory. Yet, what gives his story its haunting power is not his victories, it is his vulnerability. He is a man who could face armies unflinching, yet trembled beneath the touch of the Morrigan's hand. He is a warrior who could wound gods, yet could not sever himself from the memory of her kiss. He is a hero who carried within him not only courage, but longing, not only strength, but fragility. And it was this fragile humanity that sealed his place in myth, for it allowed him to be both adored and undone. Their story is not confined to the mists of ancient Ireland. It breathes within every telling of love that destroys, of passion that burns too brightly, of pride that refuses to yield even when the heart begs to surrender. It reminds us that desire is as much a herald of endings as it is of beginnings, that the line between love and ruin is always perilously thin. To listen to their tale is to feel that line beneath one's own feet, to shiver at its beauty, to ache at its inevitability. For the Morrigan is not gone. She lingers still, not only in crow's form upon forgotten battlefields, but in the silence after a lover's rejection, in the shadow cast by passion denied, in the memory of what might have been. She is eternal, woven into the cycle of fate, a goddess who does not vanish when ignored, but who deepens into myth precisely because she is refused. And Cuchulainn lives on as well, not merely in tales of victory, but in the ache of his defiance, in the haunting knowledge that he stood at the threshold of love and could not step across.
This is the beauty of tragedy, that it leaves us with more than resolution. It leaves us with longing. It leaves us with questions unanswered, with images that return unbidden, with the bittersweet ache of knowing the story could not have ended otherwise. In the silence that follows their tale, the listener is left not with satisfaction, but with resonance, the echo of desire and doom intertwined. Perhaps this is why myths endure, not because they soothe, but because they disturb. Not because they grant closure, but because they open wounds too beautiful to heal. The story of the Morrigan and Cuchulainn is not one of triumph or defeat. It is one of eternal entanglement, of passion that refuses to die, of love and death forever bound. It is a reminder that beneath every glory lies a shadow, and within every desire lies the seed of ruin. And so, as the mists close once more over the hills of Ireland, as the crows cry out across the gray sky, the tale lingers. We see a warrior, proud and unyielding, walking toward a fate he cannot escape. We see a goddess, both lover and destroyer, watching from the shadows, her curse and her longing entwined. And between them we feel the tension of passion denied, of glory entwined with doom, of beauty sharpened into tragedy. It is a story that does not end. It is a story that returns with every heartbeat, with every longing glance, with every whisper of desire. For love and death are not opposites, they are mirrors, reflecting the same eternal truth, that what we yearn for most deeply is also what undoes us, that what we fear most greatly is often what we cannot resist. And in that truth, in that haunting beauty, the myth of Cuchulainn and the Morrigan lives forever.